When you finally start standing up for yourself, when you start speaking your mind without asking for permission, when you stop apologizing for existing, you will notice something surprising. Not everyone will cheer you on. In fact, some people will look at you with thinly disguised contempt or even outright hostility. They hate you because you're no longer weak, because your strength makes them confront their own comfort with your old fragility. You used to be easy to control, easy to predict, easy to dismiss. You were the person who said yes when you wanted to say no, who kept the peace at the expense of your own sanity, who played small so others could feel big. You were their safe, convenient version of you, harmless, compliant, and eager to prove your worth. But the moment you start stepping into your power, the moment you start enforcing boundaries and refusing to play along with their expectations, the dynamic shifts. You are no longer feeding their sense of superiority. You are no longer enabling their entitlement to your energy and attention. And that threatens them, because your transformation is a mirror. It reflects back all the ways they have stayed stagnant, all the ways they are still dependent on manipulating or diminishing someone else to feel significant. Your courage reminds them of their cowardice. Your clarity exposes their confusion. Your refusal to be used challenges the convenient lies they have told themselves about you and about themselves. So they hate you. They resent your growth. They resent that you will not return to the version of yourself that made them comfortable. But this is not your burden to carry. It is not your responsibility to shrink again so others can avoid their own insecurities. You did not come this far only to abandon your progress in exchange for shallow approval. You did not do the work of healing and awakening just to crawl back into the cage you finally broke open. Understand this. When you reclaim your voice, you disrupt the unspoken agreements that were built on your silence. When you start saying, "This doesn't work for me anymore," you force everyone around you to reevaluate how they relate to you, and some will not be willing to do that work. They will try to guilt you, shame you, or question your motives. They will say you've changed, and you have, but what they really mean is you've stopped being who they needed you to be, so they didn't have to evolve. This is one of the most uncomfortable parts of personal growth, realizing that not everyone will celebrate it. Sometimes the people closest to you will be the ones most invested in keeping you small, not because they hate you outright, but because your power disrupts the role they have come to rely on. They may have loved you as long as you were convenient. They may have respected you as long as you didn't challenge them, but unconditional love does not require you to remain in a state of learned helplessness. Real respect does not evaporate when you become more self-possessed. If their affection was contingent on your weakness, it was never love. If their friendship depended on your compliance, it was never respect. It was a transaction, and you were paying for connection with your self-betrayal. You don't owe anyone your continued sacrifice. You don't owe anyone the performance of who you used to be. You have the right to outgrow dynamics that keep you small. You have the right to build a life where your voice matters as much as anyone else's. You have the right to become someone who no longer needs permission to exist. Yes, they may hate you for it. Yes, some doors may close. But every time you choose self-respect over appeasement, you open the door to a different kind of life. A life built on truth instead of performance, on connection instead of control, on authenticity instead of approval. The fear you feel when you start standing your ground is natural. It's the residue of old programming that taught you your survival depended on keeping others comfortable. But you are no longer that version of yourself who believed you had to disappear to be loved. You are no longer that version who believed that your worth was conditional. The discomfort you feel now is the growing pain of liberation, and liberation is worth every moment of unease. Because on the other side of that discomfort is a life where you no longer have to pretend, a life where you can be strong without apology, a life where you can be clear without guilt, a life where you can finally trust yourself. So when they hate you because you're no longer weak, let them. Let them project their disappointment. Let them stew in their resentment. Let them cling to the old stories you no longer fit. You don't have to convince them to understand. You don't have to prove your goodness. You don't have to return to the cage just because they're too afraid to leave theirs. The truth is, your strength will always be threatening to those who benefit from your weakness, but that doesn't mean you should dim your light. It means you should shine brighter. It means you should keep going, because you didn't do all this work to remain a version of yourself who keeps the peace by abandoning your soul. You did this work to become whole. And wholeness is worth losing the approval of those who only ever valued your brokenness. You are no longer available for the relationships that require your diminishment. You are no longer willing to trade your self-respect for scraps of validation. You are no longer a participant in your own oppression. And if that makes them uncomfortable, if that makes them angry, so be it. You didn't come here to make everyone else feel safe. You came here to remember who you are. You came here to reclaim your life. And that, in the end, is something no amount of their hatred can take away. There is something almost inevitable about the way people react when you stop playing the role they assigned you. For years, you might have been the one who always agreed, who never set limits, who absorbed everyone's frustration and called it compassion. You were the dependable one, the accommodating one, the easy one. But that was never your true identity. It was a coping mechanism, a survival strategy you learned early, perhaps because you were taught that love had to be earned by being small and agreeable. The day you decided you would no longer diminish yourself to keep the peace, the day you chose self-respect over acceptance, was the day you stepped out of that script. And some people simply cannot tolerate it. They can't handle the disruption of your newfound strength because it exposes the fact that their power over you was always an illusion. It wasn't that they were stronger or smarter or more important. It was simply that you had not yet remembered your own worth. Now that you have, everything they took for granted is slipping away. The energy you once spent caretaking their emotions is returning to you. The time you once wasted second-guessing yourself is being redirected into your growth. The constant anxiety about their opinions is dissolving into a quiet, steady self-trust. And when you change, you force them to confront their own unwillingness to evolve. Some will respond by trying to pull you back into the old dance. They will question your character, call you selfish, accuse you of being ungrateful or arrogant. These are just tactics to manipulate you back into your old place. They are not signs you are doing something wrong. They are proof that your boundaries are finally working. Because a person who genuinely respects you doesn't need you to remain small to feel secure. A person who cares about your well-being doesn't attack you for growing beyond the limitations they set for you. And when you see this clearly, you understand that the discomfort they project onto you is not a reflection of your new strength, but of their own fear of losing control. This fear can show up in subtle ways. A backhanded compliment, a sigh when you express an opinion, a disapproving silence when you share your plans. Or it can show up as outright hostility, rage, insults, or cutting you off entirely. Whatever form it takes, it is all rooted in the same truth. You have become inconvenient. You no longer play the role of the silent supporter or the quiet doormat. You are a person with agency now, and agency disrupts all the dynamics that depended on your compliance. And while it can be deeply painful to lose relationships or experience hostility because of your growth, remember this: you are not losing love. You are losing a transactional arrangement that required you to abandon yourself. Real love does not wither in the face of your strength. Real connection does not evaporate when you refuse to be manipulated. What you are actually shedding is the illusion of safety that kept you trapped in cycles of resentment and exhaustion. And yes, it is scary. It is terrifying to look around and realize that many of the people you trusted only cared for the version of you who needed them to feel worthy. But you have come too far to pretend you don't see it. You have come too far to pretend you can unknow your worth. So let them be disappointed. Let them be angry. Let them gossip and complain and try to shame you back into submission. You don't owe them an explanation for becoming the person you were always meant to be. You don't owe them a performance of weakness so they can feel comfortable. Your job is not to regulate other people's emotions about your healing. Your job is to keep healing anyway. The truth is, they hate you because they can no longer extract what they used to from you. They can no longer siphon your attention, your reassurance, your time, or your compliance without consequence. And the reality is that some people never actually valued you. They valued the access they had to your energy. Now that access is being restricted. Now your love has boundaries. Now your presence is no longer unconditional to the point of self-erasure. And to people who only knew how to take, this feels like betrayal, but it isn't betrayal. It is self-respect. It is maturity. It is the inevitable consequence of waking up to your own dignity. There will always be those who insist you have changed for the worse simply because you will not let them control you anymore. And while it hurts to be misunderstood, you must remember, their interpretation of your strength is not your responsibility. It is simply the story they tell themselves to avoid their own discomfort. So when you feel tempted to shrink again, when you feel tempted to apologize for growing, pause. Remember that you have already tasted what it feels like to live small. You already know the cost of making yourself less so others can feel more. And you already decided you would never pay that price again. You chose this path for a reason. You chose this clarity because you were tired of betraying yourself to maintain false peace. You chose this confidence because you were tired of being disposable in relationships that demanded your silence. And you chose this strength because you finally understood that nothing is worth sacrificing your self-respect. So keep choosing it, even when they hate you, even when they don't understand, even when you feel alone, because this loneliness is temporary, but the freedom you are creating is permanent. You are building a life where you don't have to pretend. You are becoming a person who can look in the mirror and know that you are living in alignment with your values, and no amount of disapproval is worth trading that away. One day, you will look back on this season and see that their resentment was simply confirmation that you were finally becoming whole. One day, you will realize that the price of your liberation was worth every awkward conversation, every closed door, every moment of doubt. Because you were never meant to be weak forever. You were never meant to stay small just to keep other people comfortable. You were meant to stand tall. You were meant to be strong. You were meant to be free. And nothing they say can change that truth. The world does not slow down because you're scared to grow. It doesn't pause and wait for you to catch your breath or protect your comfort zone. Everything is moving, evolving, shifting, and if you stay still, rooted in fear or ego or laziness, you'll wake up one day and realize you've been left behind, not because the world is cruel, but because you refuse to move with it. If you don't want to change, you will be replaced. That's not a threat. That's a fact. Look around you. The people who rise, the people who thrive, are not always the smartest or the most talented. Often, they're just the most adaptable. They're the ones who get back up when they fall, who learn when others resist, who evolve instead of defend their limitations. They don't waste time blaming the economy, their upbringing, their boss, or the weather. They take ownership, not excuses, because they understand something most people ignore. The only constant is change. And if you're not willing to grow, someone else will. Someone else will outwork you. Someone else will learn the new tools, adapt to the new system, show up with hunger while you're still clinging to your outdated sense of entitlement. Harsh? Maybe. But reality doesn't care how you feel about it. You can choose to believe you're irreplaceable because of what you did in the past. Or you can wake up and realize that yesterday's wins don't guarantee tomorrow's relevance. The world forgets fast. What matters is who you are becoming, not who you used to be. The job you've had for 10 years, it won't protect you if you stop adding value. That relationship you're coasting in, it won't last if you refuse to grow alongside your partner, That business you built from scratch? It can fall apart if you resist the innovation necessary to stay ahead. This isn't about paranoia, this is about truth. Growth is not optional, it's required. You don't have to change everything overnight. But you do have to stop pretending that staying the same is noble. It's not. It's a liability, because while you cling to your habits, someone else is breaking theirs. While you defend your excuses, someone else is rewriting their story. While you procrastinate, someone else is building momentum. And guess who wins in the end? Not the one with the best intentions, the one who evolves, the one who adapts, the one who refuses to stay stuck just because it's familiar. You don't need to be perfect, but you do need to be honest. Is the life you're living right now aligned with who you say you want to be? Are your habits, your choices, your routines moving you forward or keeping you in place? If nothing changes, nothing changes. And that might be the most dangerous place to live, in the illusion that you have time, that you can delay your growth without consequences. Because time doesn't care about your delays. The world keeps moving, and eventually it will move on without you. It doesn't matter how loyal you've been to an industry, a company, a dream. If you don't evolve, you'll be replaced. Not because you're not enough, but because you chose comfort over progress. This is not a judgment. This is a wake-up call. Your life is not a rehearsal. You don't get a second chance at today. So what are you doing with it? Are you investing in skills that matter? Are you strengthening your mindset, your discipline, your awareness? Or are you waiting for someone else to hand you clarity, motivation, or permission? No one is coming to save you. That's the hard truth. No one is going to drag you across the finish line. You have to want it. You have to decide that growth matters more than comfort. You have to be willing to let go of who you've been so you can become who you're meant to be. And yes, that's hard. But you know what's harder? Waking up 5 years from now in the exact same place, wondering why you feel so empty, so frustrated, so resentful of others who passed you by. It's not luck. It's not privilege. It's not fate. Most of the time, it's just action. Small, relentless, uncomfortable action. The willingness to change, not when it's convenient, but when it's necessary. Growth hurts. Change is uncomfortable. But so is staying stuck. So is pretending. So is living a life that looks fine on the outside, but feels like decay on the inside. If you're honest with yourself, you already know where you need to shift. You already know the patterns that are keeping you small, the habits that are costing you progress, the attitudes that are poisoning your potential. Don't wait until life forces you to change. Don't wait until you're replaced by someone who simply had the courage to do the work you avoided. Be proactive. Be intentional. Be bold enough to reinvent yourself while others are clinging to who they were. That's how you stay relevant. That's how you stay powerful. Not by being perfect, but by being willing. Willing to grow. Willing to learn. Willing to let go. Because in a world that never stops moving, the real danger isn't being wrong, it's staying still. So don't keep evolving or get left behind. Change is rarely convenient. It almost never arrives with perfect timing, wrapped up in certainty and comfort. Most of the time, the invitation to change feels like an interruption. It feels like life showing up unannounced, tapping you on the shoulder and whispering that the way you've been doing things no longer works. And if you're honest, you can feel when that moment has come. You feel it in the quiet dissatisfaction you try to dismiss. You feel it in the resentment that simmers under the surface when you watch others evolve. You feel it in the dread that hits you when you think about staying exactly as you are for the next 5 or 10 years. But instead of honoring those signals, most people numb them. They convince themselves that discomfort is something to be avoided, that if they wait long enough, clarity will arrive without any effort, that the universe will somehow make the decision for them. But here's the truth. If you don't choose to change, you are still making a choice. You are choosing stagnation. You are choosing to watch opportunities pass you by while you overthink every possibility. You are choosing to hand over your potential to fear, and eventually life will respond accordingly, because nothing thrives in a state of permanent hesitation. Relationships wither when you refuse to grow. Careers plateau when you resist learning. Dreams fade when you refuse to take risks. And the space you don't fill with intention will be occupied by someone who is willing to do what you won't. This is how you get replaced. Not all at once, but incrementally. It starts when you stop paying attention to what matters. It grows when you become defensive about your own complacency. It solidifies when you decide that your comfort is more important than your calling. And by the time you realize what you've lost, it often feels too late to start again, but it never is. The problem is, most people would rather protect their pride than admit they need to evolve. They cling to the identity they built years ago, even when it no longer fits the person they've become. They defend old habits because it's easier than building new ones. They blame everyone else for their lack of progress instead of facing the truth. Their life is a reflection of what they've tolerated, and what they've tolerated has been shaped by the fear of change. If you're tired of feeling replaceable, if you're tired of watching other people take the chances you were too scared to pursue, you have to do something radical. You have to stop waiting. You have to decide that you will not abandon yourself any longer. You have to be willing to fail, to look foolish, to outgrow people and places that don't support your evolution. Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is to spend your days in quiet desperation, pretending you're satisfied while your potential rots from neglect. The alternative is to wake up in 10 years and realize you've been living on autopilot, performing the same routines, recycling the same excuses, blaming the same circumstances. Growth is not an accident. It's an intention you honor every single day. It's in the books you read instead of scrolling your phone. It's in the skills you practice when no one is watching. It's in the courage to say, "I don't know, but I'm willing to learn." It's in the decision to stand up when you've failed and try again with humility. This is what makes you irreplaceable, not because you are perfect, but because you are committed. Committed to staying awake to your own life. Committed to bringing your best to the table, even when it's uncomfortable. Committed to becoming a little better today than you were yesterday. The people who thrive are not immune to fear. They are simply unwilling to let it define them. They feel the same uncertainty, the same doubt, the same temptation to settle. But they choose to act anyway. They choose to evolve instead of hide. And in a world that constantly demands more, this is what keeps them relevant. So ask yourself honestly, where have you been hiding? Where have you been pretending you don't need to grow? Where have you let your fear of discomfort convince you to settle? You already know the answers. You can feel them every time you lay awake at night, wondering if you're wasting your potential. You can feel them in the envy that rises when you watch someone else take bold steps. You can feel them in the regret that whispers to you in quiet moments. Don't run from those feelings. They are your compass. They are the proof that you still care, that you still want more, that some part of you refuses to die quietly in the comfort zone. Listen to that part. Honor it, because the moment you stop pretending that you don't need to change is the moment you start becoming someone who can no longer be replaced. Not because the world owes you anything, but because you are willing to do what most people won't. Confront your own complacency, dismantle your excuses, and step into the unknown with intention. The cost is high. You will lose things. You will lose the illusion of certainty. You will lose the approval of people who liked you better when you were predictable. You will lose the ease of blaming the world for your inertia. But what you gain is infinitely more valuable: your self-respect, your momentum, your capacity to build a life that feels like yours. You will never feel fully ready. Do it anyway. You will never have every answer. Learn anyway. You will never be able to guarantee success. Try anyway, because at the end of your life you will not be comforted by the fact that you stayed safe. You will wish you had been braver. You will wish you had dared to become the person you knew you could be. If you don't want to change, you will be replaced. But if you do want to change, if you are willing to embrace discomfort, you will discover something most people never find: the freedom that comes from refusing to settle. You will never outrun the truth that if you don't change, you will be replaced. But here's what too many people forget. Being replaced doesn't just mean losing your job or missing out on a promotion. It means becoming irrelevant to your own potential. It means living a life that looks okay from the outside but feels hollow because you know deep down you stopped growing. It means watching other people step into opportunities you could have seized if you'd only had the courage to evolve. And eventually, it means having to face the hardest question of all: what would have been possible if you'd chosen to adapt instead of resist? This is the hidden cost of stagnation, an erosion of self-trust, a quiet sense of betrayal that you carry because you know you abandoned yourself. You can decorate it with rationalizations about timing, about circumstances, about how life got in the way. But at night, when the distractions fade, you still feel it, that dull ache of wasted potential, that secret jealousy of those who took risks, that regret that you never really tested your limits. And the truth is, it doesn't matter how many excuses you stack up. The world moves on, markets evolve, industries shift, relationships grow or decay, technology advances, people transform. And the longer you cling to your old ways, the more certain it becomes that you will be left behind, not because you aren't capable, but because you refuse to get uncomfortable. So let's get honest. What have you been tolerating because you're afraid to grow? What have you convinced yourself is good enough, even though you know it's slowly suffocating your ambition? What stories have you been telling to justify your inertia? Maybe you've been telling yourself you're too old to learn something new. Maybe you've decided you're not smart enough to reinvent your career. Maybe you've accepted the lie that other people are braver, more talented, more deserving of opportunity. But none of that is the truth. The truth is you're scared, and you think that by staying the same, you can avoid the pain of failure. But you can't, because stagnation is its own kind of failure. It's the failure to honor your potential, the failure to meet life with curiosity and courage, the failure to respect yourself enough to keep evolving, and eventually it costs you everything you say matters: your self-respect, your relevance, your joy, your ability to feel proud when you look in the mirror. So if you're tired of that silent disappointment, it's time to stop negotiating with your excuses. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to know exactly where you'll end up. You just need to decide that your growth matters more than your fear. You need to choose action over avoidance, because the clock is ticking whether you move or not. The people who thrive are not superhuman. They just refuse to stay stuck. They understand that the discomfort of growth is temporary, but the regret of staying the same lasts forever. They choose to be beginners again and again. They risk embarrassment, confusion, and failure. And in doing so, they build resilience that most people never develop. They become irreplaceable because they are willing to be uncomfortable in service of something bigger, their own evolution. And here's the paradox: the more you avoid change to feel safe, the less safe you become, because eventually the world will demand skills, perspectives, and strengths you haven't built. The more you resist change to feel confident, the less confident you feel, because deep down, you know you're not growing. So the question isn't whether you can afford to change. The question is whether you can afford not to. Every day you stay the same, the price goes up. Every day you defer your growth, the gap widens between where you are and where you could be. And every day you wait for permission, you lose a little more faith in yourself. The good news is that it doesn't have to stay this way. You can choose differently right now. You can decide that you will no longer betray your own potential. You can start learning, practicing, asking questions. You can make small shifts, reading instead of scrolling, exercising instead of numbing out, creating instead of consuming. You can let go of the fantasy that you'll wake up one morning and feel magically ready. Readiness doesn't come from waiting. It comes from movement. It comes from action. It comes from proving to yourself that you can handle more than you thought. And once you taste that momentum, it becomes addictive. You realize that the discomfort you were avoiding was never as dangerous as the regret you were accumulating. You realize that the fear you thought would break you was really just a doorway to your next level. And you realize that the only way to truly secure your place in this ever-changing world is to keep growing, over and over again. So don't wait for a crisis to force your hand. Don't wait to be replaced to finally care about your evolution. Decide today that you are done playing small. Decide that you will be the person who moves, who tries, who adapts, who learns. Decide that you will not be the one left behind because you are too proud or too afraid to change. You don't have to become someone else overnight. You just have to refuse to stay exactly the same. Because in a world that never stops changing, your growth is not optional. It is essential. It is the only way to stay relevant, to stay fulfilled, to stay fully alive. And if you need a reason to begin, let it be this. You deserve a life that reflects your courage, not your fear. You deserve to know what it feels like to look in the mirror and respect the person looking back. You deserve to become someone who is impossible to replace, not because you were perfect, but because you were willing to learn, willing to fail, willing to grow. That's what makes the difference. That's what sets you apart. And that's what will carry you forward when everyone else is still waiting for permission.